right. Welcome to another episode of the Wenner Folsom podcast, your place for battle-tested leadership and resiliency. I'm really, really excited about our guest today. He is one of my best friends and closest brothers. And this is just an epic human who's doing so much in the world. So it's going to be a really value-added conversation with a lot of tips, a lot of strategies, a lot of takeaways. And so just so honored to have my brother Stefanos joining us today. Welcome, brother.
I love you, man. I have so much deep reverence for who you are, brother. It's everything you just said reciprocated right back at you.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, really, really grateful to have you on the show today. And I just want to start off with a couple of things I admire about you, and then we'll dive into a conversation around it. But I look at a lot of capacity now, something really prevalent in my work. And what I see with men now who I seek out is like, who has capacity? Because it's one thing to be a warrior that's really focused on just mission and can mobilize in the world, whether it's through their work they do, what they achieve physically in their bodies, right? That's now mobilizing. Can I actually achieve in the world with mission or career or finances? Can I also achieve through taking care of my body, my health? And so I have vitality. And then there's a whole nother layer of relationship. Now do I have capacity to manage my business or my mission, my body, my health, a relationship, which has all the emotional debris that can come up and down and trigger our trauma and our wounding, and then a children, a family. And I see you do, and then community, right? So we have all these things. And I see you model that really well, where you're able to engage in a really powerful, multiple businesses, multiple missions, deeply committed to your health and your fitness and remain in top shape and have lots of energy, strength, and vitality. You have an amazing relationship that inspires me deeply with how you show up and how you guys love each other so deeply. And she's such an empowered woman that you've chosen. And then also you have a new child, and to see you show up as a father and how much love and care and support you have. So, and then brothers, like you have, whole communities you run in addition to our container of our community. So I just really appreciate your capacity and how you show up in the world. And so I thought I'd start off with that as the opening of the conversation of, what does that look like for you? Like, how are you able to manage? Because I think there's a lot of probably warrior culture that's going to be listening to this, that probably really strong in one area. And a lot of warriors, we get so warriored up and weaponized to go handle mission that a lot of times we fall short in taking off the armor to connect with our spouse or our kiddos, or even take care of our health. There's a lot of warriors that their health gets dismissed, and they're, a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret or in the military, they're in tip top shape, and then they transition out and their health goes to shit and they get fat and out of shape. And so just curious for you, what comes up for you and how you're able to manage that level of capacity, and not just capacity to get it done, but you're really present. Out of all the men I know, like, you show up, you show the fuck up, and you're here, you're present, you're engaged in all the things you do. And that takes work and capacity. So just curious, how are you able to manage that? What are you able to do to have that type of capacity to manage so much?
Yeah, thanks, man. And thanks for your kindness as well. I think, to be really real with it, just to get super fucking transparent, some of it really comes, there's two main things I'm going to say. The first, or three main things I'm going to say. The first is I make certain things non-negotiable in my life. Like, it's just not fucking negotiable. Even when I'm sick, I'm still training. And that's a shadow element and expression of self. But, and I do rest, please get it, I do rest, but I'm consistently looking at my edges and observing them and saying, where can I take myself, right? Where can I take, do I need a rest? Do I need it? Can I move? If I move, can I alter it? What's the internal conversation that I'm having, that am I doing enough? Should I be doing more? Then I get to work with that stuff, right? Like, I get to work with the demons or the voices or whatever's inside, right? So those non-negotiables are really important for me. And then I look at my life and what's a priority. So what are other non-negotiables? Is it spending time with my wife? Is it making sure I'm connecting with her? Is it being present for my baby? Is it ensuring that my businesses are running smoothly, or whatever aspects of those that need attention? And I look at my non-negotiables, and I look at where I'm overextending myself as well, right? The other thing is that some of what seems to be capacity, and it is, right? But what seems to be, where I'm creating, I have rhythm and success and so forth in my life, it's a byproduct of healthy orientation and, honestly, unhealthy orientation, right? And we don't speak to that part. Like, we don't speak to the part that I am stubborn and therefore I've set a goal and I'm going to achieve it at fucking any cost. And there are costs, right? And I'm going to get to that part in a moment, right? Because the learning along the way has been the cost. It's been the multiple conversations that I've had with my wife where she said, hey, you're working a lot, or you're on your phone a lot, or you seem to be really distracted, or you're overwhelmed, because I'm building greater capacity and I'm holding more. So I'm doing more. In the transition phase of that, I'm fucking overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. I'm abrasive. I'm impatient. I'm short. Like, that's weeks or months of moving through that to then settle into a rhythm where, oh, I can now hold more. But it's not just like an instant holding. It's not like, oh, I've gone from, this is something quantitative, very simple, 8 hours a day to 10 hours a day seamlessly, with that 2 hour gap being overwhelm, frustration, impatience, difficulty, right? And the conversations that need to take place with the other people or stakeholders that are invested in my life, i.e. my wife, right? i.e. my friends even. So let me come back to the shadow piece. So the stubbornness as an example, or the feelings, the subtle feelings that still exist of inadequacy. Like, I've got to prove something to my father still. Like, that still in part drives me. Now, 15 years ago, maybe it was driving me 90%. Now it's driving me 5% or 3% or whatever, but it's still there. It still drives me. Like, if I am having a bad day where maybe I'm under the weather, or I feel overwhelmed, or I had an argument with a friend, or there's a disconnection with my wife, and then things start to compound. I start to think, and I look at what's happening in my world. I'm like, well, I need to achieve some stuff to feel better about myself. That doesn't come from a healthy place. That comes from me attempting to prove my value in the world, from externally seeking validation, which is unconsciously driven by my need to impress my father. Like, we got to talk about that stuff, because honestly, those transitions that happen, that is part of how I am able to settle. And I'm not constantly transitioning, but because, we have integration periods. But if we adhere to a value proposition of part of the human experience is human expansion and growth, that's like what we're here to do, whatever that looks like, then we are going to consistently get uncomfortable. We are going to consistently have periods of discomfort and difficulty that we have to work through, that very few people see. They only just see the shining outcomes. Like, right? Obviously, you're asking the question for the audience, but that we've had multiple conversations where I've broke down to you, fucking just overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love that you're getting into this, because we talk a lot about the journey we move through from child to adolescence, where our adolescence parts of us are seeking external validation. A lot of that's driven from a fatherless society, or fathers that didn't have maps and models. So we've been embedded into a culture of masculinity that is wounded in a lot of ways. And so that wounding is our initial operating system. And then we're learning through men's work, through hard work on ourselves, through community, through other brothers, and modeling to each other, through holding the line and not letting each other run out the exits or break down, of how to stay in the container and expand more, of how to step more into service. And I love that you brought up that we all still fail. And I think it's really valid for everybody listening to see all of us are still a constant work in progress. And we're also finding our edges, and then we fall. And then in the falling, we need allies. That's what's so important, is without our allies, without our brothers, and most of us really strong warriors have learned to do it on our own. And so when you're on your own, I think that's one of the distinctions of where we keep repping and we're not able to break through, because we can't see the other side. We don't let other people in. We try to carry the world on our shoulders, and then we fall. But when we fall, we feel shame, because we feel like we can't keep up with it. And then that's when we start to shadow out. And we still do it. But I do find that with community, with brothers, with tools, with maps, with a lot more insight and awareness, we're able to recognize when we're falling, let other guys in, which is so hard. It's been one of the hardest things, is to open up the armor a little bit, because that was where we got attacked when we were younger, either through father figures or through other men. So it's embedded in us to close up and to keep the armor on, but to actually learn where it's safe to have other men to open up the armor, or other women that can hold capacity for us and nurture us through those stages, to show some of that, carry some of the load, and then learn how to lean in. And I think that's a really potent, because it's a different skill set. Like, learning to mobilize and weaponize our business or our bodies or our finances is very different than taking the armor off to hold capacity for a relationship, where our wounding comes up and our nervous systems are reacting, because our heart, there's a risk of love and losing love. And our deepest wounds come out around that, or even children, right? It's like, who am I to, model this? So I'm curious, that transition, what has been your observation of the learning of the different edge from mobilizing to hold capacity in business and then also the edges of starting to take the armor off to be more open, more vulnerable, more share some of that load, because it's a very different set of tools that I think a lot of warrior culture, that's where I think all the suicide, all the mental health problems, all the challenges is we've learned one mode, and it's been embedded from a shadow-based leadership culture, which is missing resiliency. And the resiliency is what allows us to open. So curious what's been helpful for you to start to open that. And I know you do a lot with relationships, which we want to dive into in a minute, because I think this is kind of that parlay of whether you're a man or whether you're part of warrior culture, you may be really good in your business or your mission or even your finances if you're a highly achieving entrepreneur. But a lot of times that we struggle in our relationships because it's a different set of tools that we end up destroying and bringing the war into our homes. And it's going to still happen, but we can start to make progress, and we can start to have healing, and we can start to have openings around that.
Yeah, agreed, man. And it's something that I see and witness in many men around the world with respect to being very proficient and very precise in business, in athleticism, in externally validating scenarios where they're at the top of the game, the status, their title. Yet when it comes to emotional intimacy, connection, being seen, seeing someone else, being real, allowing oneself to be criticized, but in healthy ways, and to not retract or armor up, is very challenging for most men. And so what we do is we compensate with that big energy of success, whatever that success looks like, right? So, one of the biggest challenges that I had to face was really moving through a lot of my shame around asking for help. I just couldn't trust it. But beyond not trusting it, every time I would ask for help, it would remind me of my perception of my father's perception of me, which was just never enough. Right. And so that wound was so deep and so raw and so open that asking for help wasn't an option, because I didn't want to face that wound. I didn't know that at the time. This is very unconscious. It's now, upon deeper reflection and many years of inner work around that, is realizing those core wounds, right? And so when I got together specifically with Christine, who's my wife now, I had done a fair amount of inner work. And I'm not that person that says, oh, I've done all the work, I don't need to do any more. Or again, I just go back to that framework of growth and expansion. If you're going to grow and expand, you're going to meet challenges. That means that new experiences are going to evoke maybe new layers of an old thing or even a new thing, right? It's just part of life. I just accept that. And I'm not in this perpetual state of pain or shadow work. It is just part of life. And when it comes, it comes. That's it. I either meet it or I ignore it. And if I ignore it, we know what the outcomes are of ignoring it. So when it comes to Christine, a very successful businesswoman and very intelligent in this space, I was rebuilding myself financially. I mean, she was earning 25x what I was earning when we first met, literally. And asking for help and asking for support, and moving to a whole new country and picking up my business again and having to create more momentum. And I looked at my life and I said, do I want to remain in shame and not ask for support? This woman's really connected. I know I thrive in connections and friendships and relationships. I know, you give me an inch, I'll take a mile. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean like you're kind to me and I'll take advantage of it. I mean, you give me generosity and I will run with it. I'll not only make you proud, but I'll honor, and the proud part as well is maybe a little bit of shadow stuff, but I'll honor the connection that you made. I'll honor the effort you put in, and I will really amplify this. And that's what I do, right? I'm really effective at that. And so I just lent into support. I lent into asking for help and getting curious, and I allowed myself to build. And within a very short period of time, we've only been together 4 years, and I just fast track things. Like, I earn a fair amount more than Christine. She hasn't earned less than when we first met. So it's not like, oh, she's just stopped earning because she's a mother now. No, definitely not. She's earning more than when we first met. And I use that as, I don't say that to impress anyone. I don't use it as a measuring stick either, like of my worth or value. I say it because it's just a very easy quantitative thing to say that go, oh, okay, that's a result of something. But I want to go into what the something is. And very simple language. The more inner work I do, The more I lean into my discomforts, the more external success I experience. However, I want to define that. Full stop. That's fucking simple. Like, it's not like I met with someone today. I had a meeting with someone today. I was very honored just to even have this meeting with this guy. He was basically the first guy that built, you actually may know him, Josh, that built Tony Robbins's frameworks, education platforms, and so forth. Right? I think he's in his 50s now. He looked like he was in his 40s actually, but I think he's in his 50s. And this guy said the same thing I just said then, that we agree on, like that do that intrapersonal work. Outside life changes massively. It's an inside out thing, not an outside in thing. But we chase the outside. And so I had to stop chasing the outside. I had to lean in. I had to stop being that lone wolf. I had to work with my shame that was coming up and my guilt and my pain, like my guilt of, oh, I should be the main breadwinner. I should be doing this. I should have that. I should be in this position. I also spent years really working on my inner self where most people maybe don't, right? And so I had to give myself some slack. And I just had to move through all these emotions, man, and all these processes. And as a result of that, I accelerated my growth. I accelerated my impact. I accelerated my desired outcomes. I accelerated the efficacy of the action that I could take, like, because I lent in for support. We're relational beings. But knowing that here, and being that here are very two different things.
Yeah, it's such a powerful, I think one powerful insight is I think a lot of us strong warrior culture really struggles with asking for help. I know it's one of my hardest things that I still struggle with.
Me too.
I've gotten better as I've built more trusted allies that I feel like I can open a little, and then I'm like, I'm seen, or it's opened a little, but it's still a struggle when I'm in it. I tend to revert back to those old habits at first. And then through it, I'm able to start to build more trust and more safety of starting to open, and then feel like, what do I actually need? Because we're all a little bit different. Some guys need more actionable insights. I know for me, I've learned just letting guys into my world is what I need. And so I've learned to go, if I can just let guys into, like, here's what I'm sharing, and guys are going to witness me and listen to me, because that's what wasn't happening to me when I was young, is I would express and not feel seen and heard and listened to. And so I had to carry it. And so learning now, like, oh, that's what I need when I'm in it. I need to just let the men that I trust or the women that I trust into my world. For me, at least currently, it's mainly the men, and the men hold it with me. And I'm learning the women kind of give me the nurture and really strong female allies. And it's a different type of holding, but it's different types of holding that I've learned, like, now I can take some of the load off. I feel seen in what I'm carrying, and then I can mobilize forward. And so I think anybody listening, as you're listening to this, where are you in that process? Are you heavy in the warrior, where you've been focused on external validation, or you've been focused on building? And have you not really taken that internal dive in? And has it been similar to what Stefanos said, what I've been talking about? Is it old patterns or habits or wounding that has said there's shame around it? And what would it look like if you could be supported there? What would it look like if your internal growth, it would actually allow you to start to make peace at home, start to make peace in your relationship, start to make peace with your children, and break the curse? Because that's what a lot of us are doing, is we're saying, how do we do the work for our lineage? Because our parents didn't have the tools. Our parents' parents didn't have the tools. Somebody has to start to break that curse, and somebody has to do the work. And it's fucking hard. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's messy. I know we like things clean and quick, and mission is fun because it's like fast and it's quick and it's execution, and you just get to get shit done. And it feels really achievement based because you're moving quickly. And I feel like the other tool set is like slow. It's messy. It's like you're in the unknown in the hero's journey, and you're like, I can't see up or down. I don't know what's happening. And so we don't like the mess. And I'm learning to embrace the mess. I'm learning to embrace the heartbreak. I'm learning to embrace the sorrow and the loneliness and the inadequacy and the wounding and the abandonment and all the messy parts that I just put in a nice little shiny box and put in a corner for most of my youth. And I'm learning to slowly open those boxes, navigate through the boxes. And then when I do, I got more capacity. It's like, imagine you had a room full of boxes we'd been putting in for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Even if it was just physical stuff, it still would be messy. It'd be like, I have to go through the boxes. I have to look through all the memories. I have to make decisions on what I do. It's emotionally draining. But as we start to make progress and go through that, things start to get clearer. The room has more capacity in it. And I think that's really the work. A lot of the work we're doing is creating more emotional capacity in us. And that creates more internal freedom in here. And as we do that inner work and have more spaciousness and more internal freedom, we get more connected to our divine insight from God's source. we're able to feel our bodies and clean our bodies easier and feel what we need, or what foods throw us off versus on and emotionally throw us off. And so it gets a lot more focused, and then your mission actually gets stronger. You get better externally because you've cleaned the internal vessel that allows you to actualize life. And so I really like that conversation. And just to dive into a little bit more around relationships, because I think it's super important. What would you say is some of the primary patterning you see around relationships? I know what I see with warrior culture in general and in men is typically there's a disconnect from the feminine. And I'll use this in a capacity of a man and a woman in this context, but typically there's a capacity where the feminine is expressing and very expressive in what they don't like or what's happening, because they're in the chaos. They live in that chaos, which for us feels very chaotic. But seems to be a dialogue of when that expression happens, it triggers our inadequacy and we take it personal, and that personal feels too intense. And then we shadow off into either running or destroying or offloading. And it feels like it's, to me, the primary nervous system work. But I'm curious what shows up for you around relationships and how to start to navigate some of those areas. Because I know you do a lot of work with couples. You do a lot of work on understanding, and some people listening may have never heard of understanding masculine, feminine, or a lot of warrior culture is quick to judge. And a lot of the masculine, feminine space is very much predatorial. And so somebody listening to me, I go, those are just people that are trying to have sex with women. And so maybe you can open up a little bit more of the dialogue. What is understanding the masculine, feminine? Why is it important from a very authentic, integral way to know how that helps you and how that serves you, to understand it in yourself, to understand it in a partner, and to move with those different energies a little bit? Because I think it's a unknown space for a lot of people that may be listening.
So firstly, the need or the drive or the desire, the yearning for sexual contact and sexual intimacy resides within both men and women. I would say fairly equally. There's such competing research out there, but for me, I just look at it this way. I look at how we've evolved. I look at what's been required for us to evolve and grow into the global community that we are today, to procreate, and what drives procreation biologically, hormonally, environmentally, culturally, etc. It really requires two willing participants that within their constitution have a desire to meet each other sexually. Culturally, though, that perception, I think, has been distorted a great deal. So not to go too deep into that, where men have been seen as predators or have been labeled as predators, right? Or as predatory. I don't necessarily think that's a healthy thing. The other consideration is that masculine, feminine energetics are just a way to understand the world around us and understand each other. It's creating contrast in our life experience, in our reality, to help us richly learn about ourselves, like in rich ways. The contrast creates richness in learning. So if you don't want to use masculine, feminine energetics, you can use, and Michaela Boehm speaks to this. I'm pretty sure David Data does as well, but it's a doing and being energy, a go and flow energy, a active, passive energy, a yang yin energy, a giving, receiving energy, right? Like we have these energetics that we play with in our lives. Now, they're not the only ones that we have, but if we, not to reduce it, but if we say, okay, here's the duality, here's the contrast. Am I too much in this giving energy? Am I too much in my doing energy? Am I too much in my productive, objective energy, where I'm constantly just in this space of creation and accelerated learning and growth and achievement and so forth? I may be imbalanced. I may not be creating respite in my life to energize myself, to actually optimize my doing, right? So we can look at it in that way too. Some of the biggest issues that I see, and there are a number of different issues that I see in couples, particularly with that man who's a warrior archetype, who has a very deep focus in business. Firstly, there's nothing wrong with having a focus on your mission, right? You've got to work out for you as an individual, am I hyper focused or am I hypo focused? Am I in that harmony? Am I in that sweet spot? You've got to work that out. And there's ways to work that out. You look at your past patterns, you look at your relationships. Is there tension in your relationships? Are there key areas of your life suffering, i.e. your health, i.e. your intimacy? Are you using unhealthy coping strategies? People are fucking intelligent enough to know, am I leaning too much on alcohol? Am I leaning too much on drugs? Am I watching too much TV? Am I gaining weight and eating too much? Am I numbing out in different ways? Like, people know. You've just got to sit down with yourself for a moment and ask the questions and get super honest, which we're unwilling to do, because then we see the totality of who we are, which then says, oh, we better change some things, and we don't like change. The ego doesn't like change. It's unfamiliar territory. It's scary. Let's just go with what we know. It's easier, right? So sorry about the rant. So some of the biggest issues I see with men and women in that heteronormative dynamic, in that capacity, is I spend a lot of time helping couples really hear each other and see each other's and feel each other's vantage points. Because it's not that there's a lack of effective communication. It's more that there is a fear to communicate one's truth because of what is potentially attached to the perceived outcome. In other words, if I speak my truth, like I want something, or I want to make a request of my partner, like they work less, or, hey, I want greater sexual intimacy, or this is what vacation time looks like for me, or, hey, I really want to bring the kids up or raise the kids in this way, whatever it may be, that if my partner doesn't agree with me, I will be rejected, humiliated, abandoned, right? I'll give you three core fears. There's obviously more, but there's 3 core fears right there. And so we'll either retract and not say anything, and as a result of that, cultivate resentment. Then we start bickering. Now we start leaking out, right? We're leaking out emotional intensity to our partners. We're short with them. We're abrasive. We're stonewalling. We're shutting down. Abrasive, impatient, stonewalling, shutting down. The 4 horsemen of Gottman's work. These are, I mean, he's done a lot of research, man. His institute has done a lot of research, and there's a reason why he is prominent in his space, because the research shows, and it's pretty fucking accurate. And so those are the big things that we see in relationships. We see men shutting down. I see men drifting when they don't feel validated and respected at home. And I'm going to come back to this in a moment. This is really important, right? They will go and find utility, or where their utility is approved of and validated and acknowledged in other areas, like generally in their work. So you'll see them spending more time at work. You'll see them more in their mission, because they've got a team around them saying, well done, Jim, you're doing awesome. Wow, we just did more money. That means everyone's doing better, or you just landed this contract, or you just did this big thing in the aerospace world, whatever it is that you're doing, right? Men naturally need to be valued for their utility. Now, you and I are both familiar with Jack Donovan's work, right? Mm-hmm. And I've read all of his books, and I resonate with him as an author and as a thinker as well. And some of the things that I took from his books, I don't think he says this directly. I do my own thinking around this based on his prolific writing. I think his writing's quite prolific, actually. Mm-hmm. Is that it's okay for men to want to be valued in accordance with their utility. We have evolved that way. Like, the more efficient and proficient we've been with our hands, with our skills, it has meant life or death in our tribes. It has meant life or death in our communities. So I don't think it comes so much from an ego thing, from a place of ego, although maybe in more modern times, yes. But there's something deeply innate within us that we as men in our nervous systems yearn to be of value to the people that we care for, including our family home. Now, if we have unresolved trauma, I'm going to connect some dots here, and pain, and we can't see ourselves, and we've got a shit ton of armor around us, proverbial emotional psychosocial armor that blocks people from coming in and entering our space, we are going to struggle to be present to those people. Now, there's a complementary wounding there, right? We'll get into that maybe a little later, but we're going to struggle to get present to those people. Now, what happens is they, our wives, feel that, get scared and shut down, or enact their own coping strategies in their own ways, which creates division and separation. Now, it's very convenient for me to say, I'm going to blame my wife, I'm going to blame someone else, I'm not going to look within. It's very convenient for me to say, it's not working here at home. Let me just divert my energy over here where I'm being loved and appreciated. Now, that could be your work, that could be going to strip clubs, that could be having women on the side. Infidelity and emotional betrayal, just outside of the confines of the agreements of the container of the relationship, it's a very common thing as well. So I hope I've answered your question in a long way.
Hey, we thank you for listening to the Wenner Folsom podcast. Just a couple quick notes. First, if you are a man and you're looking for an honorable and inspiring group of men to hold you accountable and challenge you to grow in your relationships, your fitness, your career, your finances, and your life, go to www.k4men.com. And if you are a veteran, first responder, or man or woman who deals with trauma, and you are looking for some resiliency tools and skills for you, your team, or your organization, go to valorresiliency.com. Hope to see you there. Back to the podcast. No, there's so many nuggets in here, and I really appreciate you going back, because I think the progression as you unpack it starts to really land in the masculine architecture and the feminine architecture of like, oh, I'm understanding this is how we're built, this is how we're wired, this is how I get my validation, this is how I get my need for serving, which is, I think, the deepest part of the masculine deeply desires to serve. And when we serve and receive that appreciation, that validation, we want to serve more. And if there's miscommunication, if there's no authenticity, if there's misalignment, if there's trauma wounding that comes up and that shuts down, and we stop communicating for fear of what that will be received as, or fear of the outcome as you placed it, and we go somewhere else, then we're split. And then that's what shifts a lot of the architecture on the masculine side. Curious, what's the flip on the feminine side? What does it show up on the feminine, so we could see, oh, this is the masculine's looking for utility, the masculine's wanting to serve, the masculine's wanting appreciation and validation. The masculine needs to do the internal work to recognize how they have to remove some of the armor to be present, so they can be seen and validated, because they're present enough from their kids and spouse to actually be seen. Because if we don't, we can't be seen because we're not around. But if we are, now we're creating the container and taking full ownership of what we need to do. What's the flip side? Like, what typically happens on the feminine side?
Yeah. So the foundational principles of what's really required from us as a human being is that inner work, acknowledgement and recognition of self, surrounding ourselves in safe environments, getting curious about our past, our present, our future, our trauma, working with someone or a group of people to really unpack that, to see the forest through the trees. That's applicable to both men and women, right? Like really looking at our quote unquote deficits, or how our unresolved pain and trauma is impacting the decisions we make. How it very specifically shows up in the feminine, and again, it depends on her history of wounding or trauma, but there is at some level this collective wound with the masculine. So the masculine cannot be trusted. And so at some level, and the masculine is unsafe. Let me just go back on something as well. So again, I mentioned that the masculine can reside within men and women 100%. And in contemporary culture, I see this teasing out of, oh, masculinity and femininity are cultural constructs. Yes, they are. And they are biological constructs as well. We can't just throw that away. We're still 3D beings. Unless you fucking evolve into the ether and you don't have any 3D material and you transcend space and time, like, you are a human being that is grounded in a physical reality that also has its roots in hundreds of thousands and millions of years of practice of being human, and our roles as human beings being teased out and influenced by our biology. Not completely, but in part. So when we speak about masculinity, we see that there can be a more prominent sense of masculinity in men as opposed to women. And our society, unfortunately, has labeled masculinity better than femininity in some ways. And that's a shame. That is a fucking shame, because it's not better or worse. It's needed just as is feminine expression, right? And again, part of that I believe in the early days has been formed because of our stature, our size, our hormonal profiling, etc. I guess our genetic makeup. I mean, just the way that we've shown up. Now, and that's been reinforced over time. So how it shows up in the feminine, if the masculine can't be trusted, if the masculine is unsafe, and we hold that belief at some level, even if it's unconscious, our brains will create circumstances in our environment that show us, that reinforce that the masculine is unsafe, so that we can hyper protect, that we can be ready for protection, right? And the same is true for any belief or any unresolved trauma. So if that's the case, and there's this unresolved sense of I can't trust the masculine, a couple of things happen. Either the feminine will completely retract and not be in her power and be very passive, right? And be weak and meek in her demeanor. And as a result of that is living a very unfulfilled, unsafe life. Or she'll turn on the hyper masculine. So she'll do more, she'll protect more, she'll be more aggressive. And that's not necessarily who she wants to be. So she's wearing a masculine mask that culture says is of greater approval than who she really wants to be. That's one. Another is this subservience to man or to the masculine. And so she compromises her values and her needs. She may say yes to having sex or being intimate or doing things for him. And he may not even be forceful. He may be, because she may attract that type of man where he's in his unhealthy shadow masculine. Or she's just saying yes to things that she doesn't want to say yes to, and she's consistently compromising herself. That's something else that I see as well. And that's, I mean, any compensatory strategy is really hurtful. You know, any compensatory strategy is really hurtful because it's not real to us. It's just so painful. And that lack of sovereignty and independence that she holds in that hypo expression of femininity is really sad. But equally though, when, you know, she's, and again, let me be very clear, like there's this movement of this boss babe movement, right? Like women are being, I don't want to say, well, yeah, they are. They're being hyper masculine, right? And again, it's not that they're being men. They're being hyper male. They're being hyper masculine in that excessive doing. Again, men are being hyper masculine in their excessive doing, their excessive sense of achievement. Now, for some women, that's actually natural and it doesn't come from an unhealthy place. I would say that that is minimal. That is a small percentage of women that come from that place. And the majority of women that are living from that place are wearing masks that they actually don't want to wear. That's been my experience with the thousands and thousands of women that I have worked with that have been, including my wife, that have been high achieving entrepreneurs and excellent business people, excellent, like so fucking business acumen and business savvy through the roof, right? And they haven't wanted to be in that highly competitive environment, like at the foundational level of who they are. However, let me go back again. And I'm very clear as well by me saying this may ruffle some feathers, right? Like I get it. It's not true for everyone. It's just an observation. But then there are also women that genuinely are very active in the world, but also desire deeply that sense of I want to feel safe and I want to be nurtured in my intimate emotional sexual relationship with my partner. And they're learning how to oscillate between the two. Just like men are learning how to be really effective in the outside expression, and then come back into the intimacy of their container and be vulnerable and be real and be honest with who they are and share some of their fears and do that in a way that isn't leaky in their energy or oppressive and forceful, but more balanced and curious and considerate of their partners.
Yeah, it's such a powerful dynamic because as you're talking, I can see these two. At the end of the day, we just want love, right? At the end of the day, like we all just want love. And then all the ways that we build ways to get love, but that are protective of our hearts. And I feel like that's the root of all this. Is at that core level. There's a really beautiful piece of art I saw at Burning Man one year where it had these two humans and it was a representation of two inner children that were these little children all glowed up and like wanting to touch hands. And it had these two humans, adult humans, facing outward in these like empty outer shells. And it's such a powerful image because I feel like that's where most of us are as a society. We're the child in us deeply wants to be seen, loved, acknowledged, intimate, connected, open, sexual with somebody deeply. But then the architecture we've built around it from our wounding in childhood, the pain and traumas we've experienced along the way, have built these exterior architectures of adults, which we have to navigate through it. And so what I really liked about this conversation is the way you framed it is, hey, there's masculine femininities that relate to both men and women. And there's masculine, we all want love. We all want appreciation. We all want to be validated. There's a little bit more on the feminine that needs to feel safe with the masculine. And I feel like there's a little bit more on the masculine that needs to be nurtured. Like we're
Agreed.
trying to find a way to get our own self-nurture because we're a little bit more in the masculine, and the feminine, because they're feminine, are lacking a little bit more of that safety. And so finding a ways to say, at least what I know has been relevant for me personally, to tie it back to my personal experiences, I struggled with my own feminine. And so I demonized my own feminine and made my own feminine wrong. So I didn't know how to nurture myself. And I was overly on the masculine side, which ironically, now that I've been doing this work to like the feminine cleanse, which I know you've done a lot of work around as well, and has been a good ally for me, of taking the total break from all feminine energies except for just purely platonic. I had to refine my feminine. And with that, I means I had to get into the messy emotions and feel these messy feelings and be with all that expression. But with it, I've now been finding like all the value of rest and relaxation and spaciousness and self-care and nurture. And the irony is now that I'm finding the devotion to my own feminine, which I'm finding at least in me as my body, in a sense, it's almost like, I'm reconnecting from this head that was trapped and disconnected from the body. And I'm finding a way back in the body, which is all resiliency based focus of like, I have to get in the body for self-care. I have to get in the body to listen, and the training and the training and the competitions I've been doing have been helping because it's getting me in the body, but I was always doing that, but I didn't have the presence and the heart and the feeling to get into the body. I was more here. And now that I'm able to get into here, my devotion is shifting towards the feminine. And the irony is it's actually making me more masculine, which is a counterintuitive to me because I'm safer to, when something comes up, be with myself. I'm less needy of that nurture from something external to give me that nurture because I'm like, I can find nurture here. And it allows me to step into even more grounded presence. And I feel the same thing as what I've seen with couples of the feminine finding a way to get their own safety and their own protection internally is like, how do I find my own safety internally? And then I'm not as threatened by the masculine with it and the vice versa. So I feel like there's this interplay of one, really good communication, right? It's really important. One, getting support and help from either a community, mentors, coaches, therapists, somebody to help you navigate. That's a witness and bystander that doesn't have a charge or is not in that emotional loop of fearing loss, of abandonment and humiliation and our deepest wounds, right? Of not enough, lack. And then finding a way to start to communicate and then self-regulate, do the practices to take care of self, become aware when we're in a survival state from our primitive brains that are built for survival, which is why we're still here, and start to learn how to go, how do I get those needs met? And then how do I start to offer that to a partnership? And so I feel like there's these deep levels of joy, happiness, expansion that get to come from deep intimacy. And I really want to label that because some of the most powerful work that I've seen men do, because I do a lot of men's work, I also do women's work, but with men is when they can take the armor off from being heavy warriors, when they can be present with themselves, when they can come home again, when they're not so on mission and at war, whatever the war is. Even if you're an entrepreneur, you're at war every day because you're handling objections and rejection and all these complex problems, but taking the armor off to come home again and starting to become presence, that's the magic. Like that's the magic of the moment when you're in this timeless moment going like, I can appreciate a sunset. I can appreciate, these moments of my children or my spouse or moments that I'm present for. So really it gets you present. And when you're present, that's when you start to be seen and get validated in the things we're needing. And so I just think there's a lot of the mental health problems and the suicide, and that I think is from an over hypervigilant culture that hasn't learned how to reconnect with our feminine. So for anybody that's listening, hopefully you're taking massive insights and lessons of like, where are you at on that spectrum? Are you a little too far on your masculine, whether you're a man or a woman? Are you a little bit too much in the feminine? And which side do you need to work on? Because there's men that are also really in their feminine, right? They get so into their feminine nature that they can't make everything happen. There's no rigid structure. There's no direction. There's no purpose. They they just get too into the moment of what's happening, and they're not doing it either. So we all need to find what pole do we need to move into? As you mentioned initially, where's your edge? What's your edge for growth and expansion that you need to step into? And it's going to require an internal look of going into those edges so that you can find more peace and then work on those and have more expansion. Because I feel like that's really what's needed now is more of these, if we can all do the work to be more whole, find more wholeness inside, to find more peace and love and more rigidity, that's really what starts to bring us home again.
Yeah. I think it's very important to remember that men are very attracted, most men are very attracted to that hero archetype, that warrior archetype, whether it's a soldier or a superhero, Batman or Superman or whatever it may be, right? And it's very important to remember that many different warrior cultures throughout the years, the Greeks, the Romans, certain tribes, certain Maori tribes that were very, very powerful warriors, right? The chivalrous code that was created from men going to war, coming back fucking broken, and not integrating back into their families. And so the king at the time said, this can't keep happening. We're destroying the fabric of our society. So we have to balance it out. Certain Maori tribes would not be allowed back into society, back into their communities, without first spending X amount of time bathing the blood and the intensity and the shame and the fear of killing another man and the sadness and the tears. And they would bathe in certain lagoons, and there would be older women there, elder women there, nurturing them, bringing nurturance back into their hearts. Some of the old tribes, the old warrior cultures in ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Mesopotamia, they would bring their men back, and they would be bathed and adored by women and so forth, just to bring nurturing back into their body. So we forget that when we do a lot, irrespective of what we're doing, not irrespective, because fighting and violence and war is quite different to building business and creation in that way. And there are similar through lines, right? There are similar through lines, especially with the intensity at some level, the internal intensity of the experience of achievement and so forth, and what's psychologically tied into that in terms of my value is tied into that experience or to that outcome, right? To that success, that win. It's really important that we learn to balance that out. That we learn to create harmony in our lives, and that it's masculine to do so. It's healthy to do so.
Yeah, and it's a perfect frame, because that's what, in our encompassing frameworks, we have leadership and we have resiliency, and that is the resiliency conversation. And I love that you're right in line with everything that we teach, is all the ancient cultures, and I like that you brought in the Maori, because I don't know a lot about the Maori, but I know it's like Spartans would break a stick and they'd write their names on a stick, and they'd go to battle and they'd put the sticks in a basket, the other half, and they'd tie the other half to their shield. And what a lot of people don't know is they were farmers, and the reason they become so powerful is they had a ritualistic process to reintegrate into battle. And in that reintegration, they would break the stick. And then in battle, they had no past, they had no future. They were here to fight and protect the man on the left, the man on the right. And then after the battle, whoever survived, when they came back, they would put the sticks back together. And that was their ritual to express. And they would scream and they would yell and they would cry and they would mourn, and they would have permission to get back into resiliency. And if you look at Native American cultures, they had sweat lodges, right?
Yep.
They did a vision quest. If you look at the samurai were required to do flower arranging and calligraphy. And so every ancient warrior culture all had resiliency practices before they were allowed back into the tribe to get their soul back.
Yeah.
And we've just forgotten those practices. And it's really important that you have reintegration rituals, that when you're in this modern day world where you live with high stress, right? Because the stress can be, you could be actually at war and deployed. You could be a firefighter or a police officer or ER doctor or nurse that deals with a lot of trauma, or you could be an entrepreneur or just somebody that lives in high stress, a mother. Think of all the stress that a mother deals with. And so how do we have a clear transition to reintegrate back, to say, okay, I'm taking the armor off. Here's what I'm going to do to reintegrate back, to open my heart up, and so that I can nurture self to come back into presence with family connection life. And so I really like that you brought the Maori into that. So vital.
I appreciate that, man. And also I'll tell you how I define toughness and resiliency, and it may be in alignment with how you do it as well. And the question that I would ask is how you integrate that in your life, right? So toughness for me, very simply, is our ability to move through challenge and difficulty and hardship, and resiliency is our ability to recover from it. So it fits in perfectly with what you're saying. Like, what's the integration? How are you recovering from the intensity that you're outputting into the world? Like, what are your recovery strategies to then, quote unquote, live to fight another day, or to go back into battle, or to go back into mission, right? Whatever mission looks like for you. But how are you nurturing yourself? These are just other ways to say it, right? How are you feeding yourself and supporting yourself? Again, like, listen to the terminology that we're using. Feeding yourself, sustenance, nurturance, like, these are feminine qualities, right? Like, they don't exist without the masculine. The masculine doesn't exist without the feminine. And so this illusion that we're separate is fucking bullshit. And the illusion that one is better than the other doesn't work. You cannot be a warrior without the space and integration. Even when we're talking about action and inaction, even when we're talking about just speaking and being verbally direct, It's the space between words that allow words to be cohesive. So if the words are the action and this, or the directness, and the space between words is the passivity, just call it masculine, feminine. Like it can't exist without the other. Two wings of the same bird. And the less we judge that and the more we embrace that, that's exactly why your path was, oh, I feel like I'm more healthy in my masculine now because I'm actually working this part of me that it's been dormant with me for so long. And I think, and this isn't necessarily specific to you, but I want to touch on this because many men have experienced this. There are high divorce rates. As a result of that, many more men are absent physically and emotionally. Even when parents aren't divorced like my parents, my father was very physically and emotionally absent. That does something to the woman. It almost forces her, it's very difficult for her as a mother, it forces her to step into her masculine more, which pulls her away from nurturance, which doesn't allow her to show her boy how to nurture and what nurturing actually tangibly is. And so this boy becomes hyper masculinized, but from a feminine embodied woman, which is very confusing. And so now that boy goes into the world, not sure how to be a masculine man and not sure how to receive. Again, giving, receiving being feminine energy. And so one of the ways is, yes, to work deeper in that, work the muscle of receiving and feminine. Another way is to actually stop our hypo or hyper masculine activity and begin to be healthier in our masculine. And what happens as a result of that is our feminine attributes and our feminine internal self starts to amplify as well, because the natural disposition of most men is to be in that masculine energetic. And so when we work that a little more, we tend to create greater harmony in the way that we express, receive, and give.
Man, so much gold. What I love about this conversation is through the dialogue, we've taken some really practical concepts of leadership resiliency, and we've taken some other concepts which could be a little confusing sometimes of masculine, feminine, and they're interwoven. And I think this has been a really healthy dialogue to go, oh, this is how I can listen to the right language to translate what masculine, feminine needs into leadership resiliency, and how if I don't have it, I'm missing a part of myself. And if I do have it, I come back to life again. And that's why you need both. It's not interchangeable. And I just really appreciate you coming on today. So many nuggets of wisdom. There's so many takeaways that I know everybody listening can implement into their life. And two things. One, I want to learn what are you working on? Like, what's coming up for you? What projects do you have? How do people find you? How do people follow you, learn more about your work? Can you share a little bit about what you're working on or any upcoming projects?
Of course. Yeah. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. So a few great things that I'm working on, and I'll list a few of them here, and you can of course see them all on my website, which is stefanossifandos.com, or most of them are on my website, stefanossifandos.com, and social media at Stefanos Sifandos. A couple of great projects that I'm working on at the moment. One I can't speak too much on. It's a little mysterious. It's one that I'll be sharing with you, Josh, very, very shortly as a private invitation, as you're aware of. But that's an amazing project that is vested in the blockchain, in the wellness space. It's going to be, it is already, I should say, not going to be, it is already a game changer in how we do business and how we amplify our service and impact as well, specifically for visionaries and creators, right? Entrepreneurs, people with big vision, but that also want to collaborate and help and support others whilst expanding their own footprint, their personal sovereign wealth and their service. I have, depending on when is this being released, by the way?
It's a good question. Probably in the next couple of months. So it'll probably be a couple of months out. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So something that's been a work in progress for me, or something in the works for years, has been, it's very fitting for what we're speaking to right here, which is breath work for the feminine. And it is specifically a women's only event. It's a 3 to 4 hour immersive where, yes, breath work is a big part of that. Breath work changed my life. It honestly probably saved me from suicide at some point, and serious self-harm at the least. It completely transformed me, and I went deep into it as a practitioner and as a student, and still am, of course. And I feel so much. There's so much to learn with breath and the body, and access to deeper transformational aspects of self. And this event is also about understanding relationships, healing that collective masculine wound, that the original wound of that wounded individual woman that has experienced a lack of safety in the masculine figures in her life. It's about relationships and dating. There's live coaching. I'll be doing that every month. I'm in Austin, Texas, so we're going to start in Austin and then expand that. But I'm very excited about that, and that's I got the first one on the 27th of September. So there's that. And then of course there's our coaching institute, which you're familiar with, Elementum Coaching Institute, which, a dear friend of ours as well, Preston, his wife, Alexi, my wife, Christine, we're co-founders of that. And that is really showing coaches how to be greater coaches for their clients. And again, the single premise is do your inner work and you will be a better coach. It's as simple as that. Like the more inner work you do, the greater impact you're going to have on your clients. And so our curriculum is really built around that. And we're gearing up for 2023 launch now. That's a very special program because I feel very honored and humbled, man. Like, because we're training and coaching coaches based on where we've come from. And I've been in this space for 22 years, technically 22 years, and so it's over 2 decades. I look at that and I go like, wow, I've been in this space for some time. And there's still so much to learn as well. And then, the programs that my wife and I run together are really special. Our Be the Queen program, our inner child work that we do as well. I'm just very excited, Josh, and I just love life, man. And I love that I'm able to serve in this capacity and create from this vantage point. And I'm just very grateful, man. Very grateful. So yeah, many great things in the works. And of course, collaboration with you as well and your amazing business, and your amazing service point. I'm so fucking excited to serve with you, man. So all those things.
Awesome, brother. Yeah, I highly recommend any of the programs that Stefanos has done. They're all amazing. So check out all the programs he has. Find something that you want to engage with and check out his work. So meaningful and integrative. He does the work. And I'm really keen on making sure that I find elevated people that are doing the integrative work. That's why it's battle tested, because they're battle tested it on themselves all the times. And I can highly recommend any of the programs Stefanos does. We always leave people with a action item, a call to action. And so just from our conversation today, anything that comes up with you of something to take away or something for them to implement into their life from this?
Yeah, I'll keep it pretty tangible, but a little abstract or a little ambiguous on purpose, right? Because I'll share a very quick story, super quick. So God is sitting contemplating, where do I place the secrets of the universe? Don't worry about the details of the I and God is sitting and all those things. So God is sitting contemplating this. Eons pass, alas, I shall place the secrets of the universe, of the cosmos, in silence and stillness, because that is where humans fear to go the most. So to be ambiguous, I think prompts, if you're attracted to it, it prompts a desire to explore. And that exploration that is earned in that way, it amplifies the wisdom that is attained. So the tangible thing that I would say is go to the places within yourself that you've been avoiding. And the ambiguous part of that is, where do I start? Figure it out. We all have, based on this premise, we all have unknown parts of ourselves. I'll give you a hint. Look at the patterns in your life, the things that keep occurring that are uncomfortable for you or that are unfavorable, they're unsavory for you. Start there. It's a great place to start because it's an indication of what's not working, and you can source that back and explore that.
So good. That's been the center of all the gold that's been coming from my life, is going into the uncomfortable parts of life and sitting with it. And then it leads you on a track. It leads you where you need to go next to find healing. So I just want to give you a big thank you, man. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with my community. I love you. I see you. So honored to be in space and have a brotherhood with you. And thank you, brother. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you very much as well.
And for everybody else, stay battle tested.